This is for chapter one of the Odyssey. Um, and the title of this song is Proselyte Preparation. And like in parentheses, subtitle, whatever you want to call it, is The Viper's Brood. So I think I recorded this song kind of later in the process. Um, wasn't sure the tone or how I wanted it to go at first until I think I was like listening to Slayer one day and I was like, Raining Blood. Yeah. Like that kind of iconic intro. Uh, but I wanted it to like be Slayer, but on heroin or something. Uh, yeah, I wanted to go really crazy with it. So it was pretty simple to record. Um, just required, that like I've got a kind of behind the camera little practice amp. It's like a 15 watt, I think, pretty small, and just used it, turned it way up, turned up the gain, and just got a bunch of squealy distortion feedback loop out of it, and recorded a few takes of it, and I probably hit some notes here and there. Yeah, I did, sure. But the whole point was just to get noise, um, a lot of dissonant, hard to listen to noise, and that was the point. It's probably not the best choice to put it as the very first track, but it just, in my mind, kind of fit. Um, it was the only one that would fit this. Well, it's not really a song. It's not even an interlude, or I guess an introduction, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. Um, Eventually, like within the last year, I added snare uh, loop that I came up with. Um, and the whole point of that was to have this kind of like drum march sort of thing. That was the idea I had since the beginning of this song. And figured out over time, I was like, it was missing something, and realized, oh, yeah, it needs like some really rumbling kind of bass to it. And I knew like plugging up my bass to my little practice amp, or even I've got a VHT amp that I sometimes use. Um, I didn't think it would be a good idea. So, you know, just sort of made sense to me to like pitch shift one of the guitar parts and double it. Um, I think I did like a octave shift and then like a double octave shift. And just to get that like low, nasty rumble to it. And so I figured that worked. Um, and so the literal meaning of the lyrics for this song, it's the opening sequence, obviously. So it starts with the main character or protagonist, whatever you want to call him. He's an instructor, maybe, or mm, orator of sorts. Um, call him the hype man, but for other soldiers who are all on a boat together on the way to like a beachhead battle. Um, I kind of imagine it as I think they're called U-boats from like D-Day in World War II, something along those lines. They're all kind of like slowly getting there and preparing for battle. And originally, I kind of figured that it was going to be another character um, who was doing all the speaking, but over time it just made more sense that this was the protagonist, like saying all this stuff to his fellow soldiers. And so the other meanings, like the allegorical, moral, the rest of that stuff, and I guess the personal. Um, the lyrics aren't necessarily autobiographical at all. I don't want to think myself as ever being that way, uh, of what he's like saying or having that attitude. But at the same time, I think back to like maybe my high school or early high school day, or high school to like early college days. Sorry. Um, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus with this, because when it comes to the institutions that I grew up in, like everybody seemed fairly cool, especially like my high school years and all that. Um, but I guess within evangelicalism in the United States, growing up, there was a certain amount of militance um, to our faith. And like the very idea of a culture war taking place that we were all a part of. Um, and in the last couple of years, I've started to question um, whether like culture war, or at least some sort of clash between these different ideologies, is actually inevitable. But when I wrote this song, the lyrics, I was questioning specifically and reflecting on whether it was actually necessary or not, and really kind of coming to the conclusion that no, it actually was never quite necessary. But especially maybe like, I I got saved in a Baptist church, like an independent Baptist church, when I was in seventh grade. Um, and in a lot of ways, they were very fundamentalistic. And it's like I recognize now that a lot of those kind of environments train up people in a certain way, and there isn't much leeway or questioning when it comes to the praxis of faith and the attitudes that we have towards other people and towards a secular culture, and things along those lines. And it's like we saw ourselves as enacting justice, but really we were becoming more like devils. So, a very influential book that I read years and years ago was, I can't remember the name of it, but it's written by this author named Darren Hufford. And he kind of postulated in this particular book he wrote. Um, the entire book was based on the 1 Corinthians 13 love chapter of the Bible, and how our skewed ideas of love um, affect how we view God. And because we know God is love, right? Um, so, what we believe love entails is who God becomes to us. It doesn't mean like he actually is that way at all, but it's our perception that he is that way. And therefore, like we end up conforming to that image of who we think God and what we think love is, but often being skewed, it's actually the opposite. So we, in turn, often attribute um, characteristics of the devil to ourselves and to God. And maybe that sounds complicated. He actually made it pretty easy to follow. Definitely a book I would highly recommend. Um, but the point is that a lot of times what we think of God and love is actually the opposite to what it actually is in reality. Um, and so the idea behind this song is that, like, these people of faith become murderers, or whatever, in this holy war, culture war. Um, and with that, I remember reading, it's probably been 11 or 12 years ago, and I don't know where that article was at or who wrote it or anything like that. I just kind of remember it up here. Um, Maybe it was from Christianity, then they wouldn't write that. Maybe it was from like Relevant magazine, or the Huffington Post or something like that. Just this opinion piece that declared that, we Christianity had been a part of a culture war in the United States for years, and that the author was declaring that Christianity had officially lost. Which some of you, hearing that may have a knee jerk response against that. Um, but it made me wonder at the time when I read the article, and even when I wrote these lyrics, you know, why did we declare war in the first place? I mean, really, was it necessary? So, lyrics, like I've got my notes here. Um, there's lines like "sling words as fiery darts at enemies." Uh, that's taking biblical language, and like the the protagonist is saying that they're going to be the ones who sling words as fiery darts, which is, like, essentially a descriptor of what the devil does, and they're doing it because of faith. That's meant to be ironic. The whole idea of calling themselves vipers or a viper's brood is meant to be ironic in that way, going back to taking on the attributes of the devil and thinking themselves as holy men of God. Um, you know, line here says, "We ride the Leviathan's back, so let the sons of God know us forevermore as the Nephilim of this age." Like, that's not a good thing, but that's the mentality that I'm trying to ironically portray in this. That they're proselytes converting nations with iron sharpening iron. That it's their God given right to define freedom. Um, that they want a theocratic governance, that they're not knights of some romanticized round table, that wartime's all they'll ever know. Um, and lastly, want to point out, uh, further in the lyrics, there's a mention of what's called the Fiddler's Green. And from what I know, the Fiddler's Green does have some like modern military uh, applications to it. I think there's some military bases that are actually like known as the Fiddler's Green, but it's actually like a 17th, 18th century kind of mythos among sailors, that it's essentially their version of heaven. It's this place where there's perpetual mirth and there's always a fiddle being played. Um, and part of this is, kind of nerdy for me, but in Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, there was one volume in particular where he puts in that there's like it, Gaiman's Sandman world is based on like this world of dreams, and he writes that one of the like sections of his world and reality is a fiddler's green, and the like personification of it is essentially the great G.K. Chesterton. So it's kind of like a subtle reference towards that too, as nerdy as that may sound. Um, but that's how I roll. So yeah, that's pretty much the first track in a nutshell.